how do we get away from the fear of public speaking? The very first thing that I advise people on is to not memorize what you need to present. Taking the attention away from yourself also lessens that stress, that enormous pressure of performing that we put on ourselves.
Meet Nausheen Chen, 3-time TEDx speaker and public speaking coach to the likes of Amazon, Google, and IBM, helping businesses energize themselves through communication. Whether it's podcasts, webinars, big stages, small stages, or boardroom meetings, being able to speak clearly and confidently is a vital skill at any stage of your career, and Nausheen helps you do just that.
I just didn't feel like I was doing something that I was truly meant to be doing. And I realized that public speaking started resonating with people. Every time I would talk about my love of public speaking, how other people might be nervous before they go on stage, and I'm just excited and ready to go.
What is the best way to immediately engage with the audience?
Just showing people that I'm not here to talk at you. I'm not here to lecture you or to just give you a boring presentation. I'm here because I'm invested in you learning something today. Just thinking about it, that intentionality is the greatest first step you can take. There are two things that I'd love all of you to explore in parallel. One is the inner reason, and
please hit subscribe to the show and leave a review or comment about how you find this episode. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on my podcast. Nausheen, thank you for agreeing. How are you today?
thank you so much, Ani. As excited to speak to you. And I am doing great. The weather is gray and ugly because it's rainy and cold in Toulouse, but that's what we have to deal with. But I'm sunny on the inside.
Oh, absolutely. Everything on the outside should come from the inside. And if you're happy, it should show, regardless of the weather. All right. So let's dig straight into it. And first, why don't you tell us all something about you? Who is Nausheen Chen?
Wow. So, you know that annoying kid who would get up in front of the entire family and recite the most boring poem ever? I used to be that annoying kid. I've been in love with speaking on stage and speaking in public for as long as I can remember. But I took the long way around to figuring out that speaking in public and teaching others to speak was my calling in life. The long way around means that my first job was in corporate. I was in the Fortune 50 world. That's where I learned to be a communication skills trainer. I liked doing that more than my actual job. Still didn't realize that I should go in that direction. I had a career change in my late 20s, got into filmmaking. And during the entire time that I was doing these corporate documentaries and commercials, very often I'd find myself working with CEOs or executives who were speaking on camera for the first time. They weren't trained actors. They had to speak on behalf of their company, tell their story, because that's the human connection we want. However, the moment these very impressive men and women started talking on camera, they became stiff and robotic and lost their entire essence. I started coaching them as part of my filmmaking director, producer work, and realized that I enjoyed doing that more than actually making the films themselves. So, second career change, here we are. I started building the entire public speaking coaching business on LinkedIn back in 2022 and went full-time Jan 2023. And now I coach people from companies like Amazon, Google, IBM, AT&T, SAP, but also ambitious entrepreneurs who want to make sure that they are making an impact and growing their business when they speak.
Great. When you were talking about talking with CEOs and executives and seeing them speak in front of the camera, I remember my first experience with public speaking. And I remember I had to introduce myself and the director asked me to do it maybe 35 times. 35 times. And I remember I was in this room and there were, supporting staff and people going and they were all rolling their eyes and thinking, oh my goodness, when is she going to say this properly? And at the end of around the 33rd time, I was so tired and angry that I said, I really don't care anymore. And this is when it actually worked out. So that reminded me this experience, which was not the best in the world, but it was great because I realized what I have to do to relax.
Right. That is exactly what it is. When we are under the spotlight, we're stressed. That's where anxiety and nerves come in, and that's where they take over. That's where people's minds go blank, or they just lose impact when they speak. They become robotic and stiff. So you hit the nail on the head. You have to learn to be relaxed in the moment. Easier said than done, but it's entirely possible.
I see. And is there anybody, I mean, in your family who is actually good in speaking? Do you take this from somebody? Is it somebody who is really equally enthusiastic about speaking?
When I started seeking out these stages to speak, it was because of my childhood, but not in that direct way. I was an only child, and everyone else, including cousins, whoever else, were much older by far because
I
I was
see.
adopted, and I was adopted late in life by my parents. They were already in their 40s and 50s by the time they adopted me. So I was always the littlest child that no one paid attention to unless she was performing something. So very early on, I learned to understand that if I want attention, if I want to tell my story and be heard, I need to be on a stage.
It's fascinating. So even at that early stage, you already had this in your mind that you had to attract attention. And what is to be adopted? How did you feel when you understood that you're going to be adopted?
That I was already, because I was already adopted from a very young
Oh, okay.
age.
And then you understood after that.
I found out when I was 18, and I believe it took me easily 15 to 20 years to process it. There's many, many
My goodness.
stages. Yeah. Denial, anger, confusion, revenge, angst. So there was a lot of dramatic stages that I passed through. Now I'm happy to report in my early 40s is now when I'm very happy with it. I actually lost my family, the family that I grew up with. Both my parents passed away, but I do have this great biological family that I have a relationship with, and I have these siblings that I never grew up with, but I love them as my siblings. I have these little nieces and nephews that I absolutely adore. I met all of them last year when I went to the US. That's where they live. So I can tell you now that I'm very, very happy at having been adopted, but also being able to access and have a relationship with my biological family.
Wow, that's amazing. So you found who your biological family is and you met them and you're in great relationship. That's amazing.
They, yeah, they weren't strangers. They were related to the parents that brought me up, overall in the same family. So thankfully, it wasn't very hard. There are people that are adopted and then they have to go on these long journeys to actually figure out who it is that they're biologically related to. So thankfully, for me, it was very simple and clear because my parents adopted me within the family.
I see. Okay. Interesting. It's a great story actually. That you are now back with your original family. It's amazing. So how did you that's what brought the peace to you, right? That you found them.
The peace comes from understanding your own truth and being okay with your feelings. That's something that's what took me 15 to 20 years to realize, because I had these feelings about it that I didn't know what to do with. Like I said, I was angry for a while, I was confused, I was upset. A lot of it was because I felt that I hadn't been told about it intentionally and I found out later. So I had a lot of questions about who I am, why is it like this, and why did I lose out on the experience of having brother and sisters. So the piece actually came from figuring out that it's okay. It's okay for me to be upset. It was okay for me to be upset as a teenager. And now it's a great place where I don't feel that I need to prove anything to anyone.
So I guess that had an impact on your work and processing all these feelings and choosing your path in life. Obviously, that has an impact on that. So what was that for you?
I would say the broader pattern here that I understood about my life was that I started off very much walking the straight and narrow. I was a by the book kind of person. I was a big nerd in school. I loved studying. I loved doing what people told me to do. That was my happiness. That was what I wanted to do. I got straight A's, graduated with a 3.6 GPA, was on the dean's honor list. And then in my mid to late 20s is when I started figuring out that I can't live a life that other people like, but I don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was what I like calling my lovely late quarter life crisis, because it happened a little bit later than 25. But that's what it was. That's the time when I broke away from my corporate job, broke away from my first marriage, broke away from my country, and just explored and meandered and wandered around. That's where I found stand up comedy, theater, improv, acting, filmmaking. And that's where I had my career change and got into filmmaking, just figuring out what it is that I really want to do and not what the world is telling me is going to be a perfect life.
No, I completely relate with this because very much in the early stage of my career, I was exactly like what you describe. Because I grew up in Bulgaria, which was behind the Iron Curtain at that time, and it was recommended that you just do whatever you're told and don't speak up a lot, and just follow the path that is there for you and don't go astray because it's not good. I didn't immediately left the country, but that was one of my goals. So you mentioned that you left you left your country, original country. So what made you do that? Was it work or you just wanted to break free and start from scratch somewhere else?
The latter, for sure. I had been wanting to escape for a while. I never really agreed with the values and principles of the country. So I wanted to figure out, who am I in an environment that let me be whoever I wanted. At the time, it was New York. That really is a city and a place where you can be whoever you want, however weird that is, however strange it is. Nothing is ever too strange for New York, ever. So it's a great place to explore who you are, who you want to be, what kind of friends you want, what kind of circles you want to be in. And that gave me a lot of courage and conviction, because we're all part of our environments. We're products of our environments. And when we realize that we can be the agent instead of the recipient of the environment or the place that we're in, that's when you start making change. But I had to get out of the environment to figure out the actions I can take, the agency I really have.
I see. So how come from New York you moved to Europe and to France?
There's actually a stop we're missing in there. That's China. So I lived in
Oh, this
China for
China.
7 years
That's
after
a
New
more
York.
direct
And
route. A more direct route from China through China to France.
yeah, if you look at it that way. So we were at the end of my master's program in New York. We knew we wanted, this is my husband and I, we knew we wanted to find a home somewhere. We just didn't know where. He was very much like me, not really attached to a particular country. And at that time, he had a job opportunity in China, even though we had never really lived there. And I had only been to China once. So we just thought it was going to be an adventure, maybe a pit stop along the way where we figure out what to do next. And the idea was to be there for 2 years. The 2 years became 7 because I ended up starting a filmmaking, video production agency there. And I was an entrepreneur for the first time. It took over my life completely. I don't know how time passed at one point. It all blurs into one. I was only focused on growing the agency, growing the business, and figuring out what entrepreneurship was about. So that's how China happened. But I knew, both my husband and I knew that we were still in search of a home. And he's originally from France, but he had never grown up in France. He grew up outside. So also very much a third culture kid. And we thought, well, why not France? I became French a year and a half ago, and I had never lived in France. So for me to really understand this new aspect of my identity, it made sense to move to France, live here for a while, figure out what being French is about, and see how much of that I can take on and want to take on.
So how many years now in France?
Still very recent, just about a year.
Just about a year.
Yeah.
So you don't know yet what is to be French, I guess.
It's a work in progress, for sure.
So what was that moment when you said, okay, public speaking is my career?
This was 2022. I was working 2 jobs at the time. I was still doing my filmmaking work, but I was already burning out. I had scaled back the agency, gone back to doing more freelance film projects. And I was also doing some PR work. I was a director at a small PR startup. I wasn't finding happiness in either one of those things. I had outgrown filmmaking because I always found just one part of it interesting, the part where I worked with my actors and non-professional talent. And I just didn't feel like I was doing something that I was truly meant to be doing. And I was approaching 40. That was one of the big triggers for me, where I realized that it's really now or never. I have to make an effort to figure out my calling in life because I always believed in it. Just like we grow up believing in soulmates and fairy tales, I always believed that there is something, at least one thing, if not multiple, that you are most suited for and that you find joy in. But I had never taken the time to find it. So 2022, the idea of figuring out what it is that I really want to do in life became more concretized when I started posting on LinkedIn. Because that's also something I've been wanting to do for a while, to build my brand, to tell my stories. We all know how much I liked attention. So I was trying to figure out, how do you get attention online? So the two things very much happened in parallel. I started posting on LinkedIn first about everything that I was doing, including my film work and the last French book I read and my opinions about things. And I realized that public speaking started resonating with people. Every time I would talk about my love of public speaking, how other people might be nervous before they go on stage and I'm just excited and ready to go. Every time I talked about public speaking, it would resonate. I would get more reactions. So it was very organic. My audience, the market, the overall LinkedIn ecosystem was responding to me talking about public speaking. So I took that as a big signal and I started talking more about it. I started creating videos that got attention. I got the attention of LinkedIn video editors. I eventually ended up doing 2 LinkedIn learning courses. And I started getting people asking me, how can we work with you? It took about 6 to 8 months of building all of this while I was still doing my 2 jobs.
Wow.
And then in Jan, it was necessary because I at this point I had no income coming in from the public speaking coaching work. Jan 2023, I decided to go full time, stopped being a filmmaker, stopped being a PR director, and just went all in on public speaking coaching. And that at that time, I believe I had about 3 or so clients, but I knew that this is the direction I want to take myself in. And now it's been about a year and a half, and I have more than 100 people that I've worked with so far, both from the corporate sector and the entrepreneurship sector. And I know that that was exactly the step I needed to take.
Great. It was. I see so often on LinkedIn people who say that you trained them. So you're really popular. Congratulations! You've done amazing for. I mean, in a matter of a year in a foreign country, which I mean, everything is new to you. 2 jobs and a third one. I don't know, when did you sleep?
I had no friends in
Okay,
my last.
yeah, that explains. So you were home working, grinding.
Just building, grinding. Yeah, that was my life.
Yeah, well, that helps. Sometimes that helps. So, public speaking, the first thing that comes to mind when people think about public speaking, and when friends know that I am going to interview somebody who is a coach on public speaking, they told me, please ask, how do we get away from the fear of public speaking? So, what is? Do you have a very efficient, effective 2 minute training for
Uh,
all the listeners and viewers?
I can take 2 minutes to get you to start thinking about it in a very concrete way. And this is absolutely the number one question I get asked. Nausheen, how do I overcome the nerves? How can I be less nervous when I need to speak in public or on camera? There are two things that I'd love all of you to explore in parallel. One is the inner reason, and one is what can you do in a way on the outside to overcome it. So the inner reason is linked to, well, why do you feel nervous? Is it the imposter syndrome? Is it the fear of judgment? The fear of being criticized by the audience? Is it the fear that you'll come across unprepared? The fear that people might not respond? What is it actually? Aim to really zero in on what is that inhibition, that worrying thought that is making you feel nervous? Because once you have clarity on that, you can work on strategies to overcome that particular fear, that particular block. And then there are things that you can do in parallel to hit the ground running when you need to start speaking on camera to get rid of the nerves. One is to develop a solid warm up routine. I call this the pre-game routine, where you can warm up your body, warm up your vocal cords, warm up your face and your expressions. If you can take 5 minutes before the next time you need to speak on stage or do a presentation, those 5 minutes, take time to just detach yourself from everything. Stop answering emails, stop networking, stop worrying about what you need to do for your clients or your boss, and do a warm up routine in those 5 minutes that helps you first calm yourself down and then get pumped up and energized. Some people meditate, some people do deep breathing, some people dance to a favorite song. When I used to smoke, it would be me going and getting a smoke. Anything that ticks off those two boxes for you. Relax, calm down, and then make sure you're pumped up and energized, because you can't bring an energy that's too mellow. Then everyone would be falling asleep. But at the
Exactly.
same time, you don't, yeah, but at the same time, you don't want that frazzled energy, which is full of nerves and you're speaking too fast, you're using filler words. So that's something very concrete and actionable that you can do. Oh, and if you go to my website, you'll actually find videos that show you how to develop that warm up routine as well.
So you said that you have to focus on the problem, but When I was having fear of public speaking, I was fearful of all these things that you said. It was not one or two, it was everything. It was whether I'm going to say it well, what the public will say, what when I'll forget it. So how do I deal with that? Because I'm afraid of everything. 5 minutes will not do it for me. I mean, for past me who was really afraid. No way. So what do I do then?
The 5 minutes are, like I said, the work that you have to do in parallel. So the working on the inner fear is longer term work that requires coaching, requires us going deep into how we can change the way that you're thinking about it, how we can reframe the way that you're thinking about the upcoming opportunity that's giving you the nerves. And the warm up routine is just one actionable thing that you can do, like I said, on the outside. And what on the outside means is it's something that will work to an extent. The best way that it would work is if you're also doing the inner work in parallel. And as for being afraid of everything, then you target them all one by one. So, for example, if you're afraid of the audience, how can you reframe that to look forward to speaking to the audience? One thing to remember is that the audience is on your side. And that's not something I say to make people feel better. It's the truth. Because if someone is listening to this podcast, if someone is watching you speak, if someone has taken out time from their day to attend an event that you're speaking at, of course they want you to do well. That'll be a good use of their time. They're rooting for you. So the audience is absolutely on your side. They are not there to judge you unless you happen to be on American Idol. Then, yes, they are judging you. But everything else, no. They simply want you to do your best. Another way of reframing it is to take the attention away from yourself and think about how you can help the audience. A lot of people get fixated on, oh my God, I need to be perfect. I need to have the perfect slides. I need to ask the right question, crack the right joke, make everyone laugh. They're putting too much pressure on themselves. They're not actually taking a step back and realizing it's about the audience. If you can help someone today with something that you are good at, and if they're walking out of that event or finishing up that podcast, having learned something new that they wouldn't have learned if it wasn't for you, then you've succeeded. So taking the attention away from yourself also lessens that stress, that enormous pressure of performing that we put on ourselves.
I see. And talking about the audience, so how do you imagine the situation? You have the 5 minutes, you're prepared, and you go on the stage. What is the best way to immediately engage with the audience?
Just thinking about that is the first best step that you can take. So many people walk onto a stage or start presenting and sharing their screen with the only intent of, I'm going to educate everyone. I'm going to tell everyone everything I know. And it becomes a one-way lecture. It becomes tedious and boring for the audience, and it becomes an exercise in futility because people can't just be educated for that long. None of us liked school that much. So just thinking about it, that intentionality is the greatest first step you can take. And then how to actually do it. If you're in person, then I recommend taking your time to look at the audience, establish eye contact with them, pausing, smiling, and then starting. You've already started a relationship with them if you take that time to just look around, find friendly faces, nod and smile, and then start speaking. If you're online, taking the time to have a bit of back and forth with the audience before you start sharing your screen and presenting slides. It works wonders. Just showing people that I'm not here to talk at you. I'm not here to lecture you or to just give you a boring presentation. I'm here because I'm invested in you learning something today, or I'm invested in you finding out more about me. If it's a sales call, for example, or a sales pitch, you can still be very audience centric. So just that engagement right at the beginning, it really pays off because it sets the right tone for the rest of the presentation.
Great. When you were talking about this, I remember when I was doing my TED talk, and I come on the stage, and I'm all nerves. You can imagine, right? And I start speaking, and the microphone is not working, so nobody hears
Oh,
me. And people started waving and
gosh.
say, "Oh no, we don't hear you. We don't." So I have to
Right.
stop and go back.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, so they had to fix the microphone, and I had to go up again. But this was a great thing. This issue was a great thing because it relaxed me so much. And people were so much, they just wanted me to do well because they were all thinking, oh my goodness, if that happens to me, I mean, they imagine that I'm now in absolute pieces. I won't be able to pick up the pieces and talk again. So when I went out the second time, it was like absolute pleasure. I always remember that. What happens? What should people do if they forget the lines? I mean, you have to say something, and then you forget. It just sometimes happens. You freeze, and your mind is totally blank. So what do you do?
The very first thing that I advise people on is to not memorize what you need to present. The only exception here would be a TED or a TEDx stage. Other than that, I have very rarely come across events where it would be better to memorize. So the first step is to have your script, whatever you want to say, in the form of bullet point keywords. Don't have a script that you need to read out or memorize. Just have bullet points for different sections of your talk. And aim to use slides that prompt you what to say rather than tell you what to say. So a difference here would be if you have an entire sentence on a slide that you need to read off, that doesn't help you because A, you're not really presenting anything, and B, you're overly relying on the slides. If you have keywords on your slide, then A, you are using that to improvise, which means you're using all the parts of your brain. You're not just accessing something you've memorized or rehearsed, but you're also spontaneously speaking and improvising in the moment. It gives you more control over what you have to say. And if you have the slides as prompts, it's very unlikely that you're going to forget because it's on the slide.
I see.
So using the slides well is an art that still, after I don't know how many decades of using PowerPoint we're at this point as humanity, but even after all that time of using PowerPoint, I don't believe we've optimized the way that we use slides.
No, I agree with that. That so often I see people reading from their slides instead of using them as a prompt to say something. And it's very sad because you've done all this work and you just come out and you read. So when you go out on the stage, you have to act a little bit, right? It's not like a normal the way we're talking here, right? It's a stage. You have to act. So how do you keep the balance between being authentic and acting?
And this is a question I get asked very often by people who find that it's distasteful for them to put on an act. A lot of people want to stay very true to what they feel and imagine is their authentic self. So I'm here to tell you there are many, many versions of your authentic self. This is something we all know. You are probably a different person, Ani, with a partner or with a child or with a client than you are here with me in the moment, being the host of this podcast. We put on different hats and play different roles, but we don't feel fake doing any of them because that's what life demands. Speaking on stage is no different. It means accessing a different part of you while still being you. You have to amplify certain parts of the way that you speak to be able to connect to the audience and be memorable. For example, showing your passion about your subject that you may not show intentionally when speaking to a friend. So when I'm talking to my friend about public speaking, I might say, "Yeah, that was great. I like that." And when I'm speaking to you on a podcast, I will say, "I'm so thrilled because I just got these great results from my client." I'm not putting on an act either way. I'm simply being intentional and amplifying how I feel so that you are able to access the same emotions. That is how we're creating a connection. So it's about simply accessing parts of you that are going to relate to the audience and amplifying them so that they become very clear as signals that you're giving to them.
You just said that many of the speaking engagements happen online these days because of the digital era and the way life and work has changed. So, what are the differences between speaking on a live stage and what should people focus on when they speak online?
There isn't too much of a difference. A lot of people feel like the two are very different, but if you have the right speaking skills, if you've been working on becoming a more impactful speaker, you'll be impactful on camera and you'll be impactful on stage. You'll be impactful in a small boardroom with three of your investors. The idea is to understand how to use your voice, your energy, and your body language to create an impact. I call that my magic trifecta because no matter what kind of speaker you like, whether you've just seen a TED talk that you love, or you're in awe of a certain celebrity or CEO who speaks really well, you'll find that they're playing with their voice, they're playing with their energy, and they're playing with their body language. And of course, some of these come more into play than others. So if you are on a stage, of course, your full body language is going to come more into play than if you're on camera. What does that mean? It means that maybe you need to bring a bit more energy on camera. Maybe you need to go that extra mile to make sure that your framing at least shows your head, your torso, your hands, so people can see more of you than just a floating head. So the differences are more to do with how do you work with the two kinds of environments. If you're the kind of person who's very used to speaking in person, live, who's very used to having an audience react to them, I've very often seen that that kind of person lacks energy and motivation when they're speaking on camera because they can't see the audience, they can't feel them, they can't feel the vibe in the room. Then that means you need to figure out for yourself what's going to help you bring the same vibe on camera. Some people use googly eyes. Some people use stuffed animals. Some people put pictures of people around them to remind them. Some people ask others to turn on their camera to interact with them. So it's about figuring out what are the pros and cons of that environment and how you can use your speaking skills to create impact regardless of the platform.
Yeah, speaking about when you're in a call and everybody's without camera, it's very, very difficult to kind of feel the audience and gog the audience and have this excited um, tone of voice and everything. It's really tough. I find it also tough when I have to record introductions or anything for my podcast. So I haven't
Mm.
yet found the right kind of incentive, not incentive, but the right way to make myself more excited. What I do is before that, I read something funny or I talk to my husband something excited. So I'm just still in the moment and I start recording. Maybe stuffed animal, why not? At least I'm speaking to somebody. Um, so if somebody wants to improve their speaking skills quickly, what do you recommend they should do?
Start recording yourself speaking, watch it back, figure out what are the natural strengths that you're bringing to the table and what can you work on that seem to be your opportunity areas. That's where an understanding of that magic trifecta will come in handy. You need to understand, are you varying your voice, or are you flat and monotone? Are you bringing enough energy, or are you super low or super high? Are you using your body language, or are you just a floating head? So, watching yourself back, and if you're not able to see your own blind spots, which is very often the case, then seeking feedback either from a coach or from friends, from your team, and aiming to improve one thing the next time that you speak, and really using speaking opportunities every chance you get, speaking up in every meeting that you can, making more presentations than you're used to, and doing speaking exercises, which literally just means finding a subject and talking about something for a minute with the only intent of watching yourself back and improving. That will exponentially pay off.
Amazing. No, that's such a sound advice in such a short thing. Thank you so much. So we're going towards the end of the podcast, and I just want to finish it more on a personal side. There was something that we don't know about you.
I'm a huge Doctor Who fan.
Oh
That's
my
something a lot
goodness.
of people don't know. Yeah,
Why?
a straight Whovian. Well, I started watching the show about 11 years ago, and it's just stayed with me. And I love the character of the Doctor. So for those of you listening who may not be familiar, Doctor Who is a very old running BBC TV series that's been revived. Now, arguably, you could say it's been revived multiple times. The most recent reincarnation is on Disney Plus. Just something I'm not too happy about as a Doctor Who fan, but that's a whole Pandora's box. The Doctor in the Doctor Who series is a time traveling alien, which makes it sound very out of worldly, but actually it's very, very human. There are a lot of things that this character sees and has to deal with, and there's a lot of humanity in the series. It really makes you reflect on what is good, what is evil, what are these definitions that we've set up for ourselves? How do we challenge them? How do you stay true to what you believe in? What do you believe in? Should you question what you believe in? So it's very, very philosophical, which I love, but it's wrapped in that science fiction genre. So all things that I love about it.
Wow, I've seen Doctor Who, but your explanation about it really is at a completely different level, honestly. And talking about philosophical stuff, what was the most happiest moment in your life?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's got to be when I got married. I think that has it's by default the one. My second marriage, that's where we decided to go to a park in our neighborhood. So at the time, I was living in New York. I was in Brooklyn. For those of you who might be listening who know Brooklyn, would know Prospect Park. It's the, I believe, second biggest park after Central Park in the city. And we just went there with about 20 of my friends from university and one professor, had a little ceremony next to a lake, and went to a neighborhood bar for lunch. And that was our wedding on a cold day in April.
Wow, amazing.
Thanks.
That's such a great way to finish the podcast. Thank you so much
Thank you, Adi.
for all the advice. I'm absolutely sure that people are going to have a notebook while listening or watching and take notes. I took a lot of notes too. So thank you so much for this, Nausheen, and all the best to you.
Thank you, Ani. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely end to your week too.
Thank you.